Good evening all. Welcome to the Blavatskyhouse. Tonight is the second talk in the series Universal Wisdom. And we are going to try to help you how to find the 7 facets of truth. And we'll do that in 3 blocks of about 20 minutes. And after each part of the talk there will be a short 3-minute break during which you can ask your questions. In the first block we are going to try to figure out the first 2 facets of truth, and that's an active process because truth doesn't come easy. The search for truth requires an active attitude, an inquisitive mindset, and above all, the will to find truth. And to do so, you must leave behind possible hobby horses and break down any ingrained thought patterns. Be flexible in your thinking and do not attach to some ideas of the past. It is this attitude that every great teacher put before his students. Examine everything and preserve the good is the advice of Paul, gives in the Bible. Consider my teaching as a goldsmith judges the gold offered to him, says Gautama the Buddha. Test if it's real gold, and if you're sure it's gold, only then you should buy it. Only when you are sure you are dealing with truth, you may accept it. Now we are talking about truth with a capital letter. And as we told you 2 weeks ago, there's only one absolute truth, the boundlessness itself, the incomprehensible, boundless space. This all-encompassing, absolute and limitless truth can never be fully known. We discussed this at length in our study, very inspiring and interesting study we had together last week. Any limited being, and every being, even the loveliest God, is limited, can never be the unlimited, cannot be the boundless per se, for if it were as a manifested being boundless, it was no being. 2 weeks ago we also told you that although in the heart of its heart every being is boundless, as a manifested being it is limited, because if it were boundless it would be everything, and then it was no ego, no being, no entity. But we also told you, and that's hopeful, that you can still get some knowledge of the absolute truth. You can gain some awareness of it. You can experience it. You can experience the universal, boundless truth as a concept, as an idea. You can take it into account in your life as an idea. You can start from the boundless. Hence, it is not that we can never know truth. We can come to some understanding because there are partial truths, truths derived from the boundless principles. Or actually, derived is not a good word, but all words related to the boundless principle never reflect exactly what is meant. The other truths can be called relative truths. Relative because they are always in relation to something else, because they always relate to the bonds between consciousnesses, between beings. 2 weeks ago, in addition to the boundless, eternal and omnipresent principle and the absolute truth, we discussed 2 more fundamental propositions that you can also find in the Secret Doctrine. And the Secret Doctrine is the title of the book of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, but you can also take it in this context as Theosophia, divine wisdom or the wisdom of the gods. So the first proposition is the boundlessness, and the second proposition is the cyclicity of everything. And the third is about the coherence, the bonds between all beings. They all form a web in which all beings are inextricably intertwined, and in which each being evolves more and more of its inherent capabilities and potential. That evolution, developing our latent capacities, is called the obligatory pilgrimage, a pilgrimage of every being in conjunction with all other beings. You see that this third proposition is difficult to capture in a few words. We called it fundamental equality and growth, but if you listen to my talk from 2 weeks ago, you know that this third proposition contains much more. Those last two propositions, and especially the third one, are about the relationships between beings who in an eternal, ongoing, cyclical continuity manifest themselves. That is the period of activity, and after that active phase they withdraw from the manifestation, and then follows the period of rest or inactivity. Well, in that constant movement, the ebb and flow of life, you can discover 7 truths. We call those truths the 7 jewels of wisdom. And those truths, those relative truths, are not inconsistent with the 3 fundamental propositions of the secret doctrine, but they explain those propositions. They provide more information, more details. It's like zooming in on truth more and more, like you can zoom in on a picture or on a painting, and then you perceive more and more specifics, more details. While doing so, never forget the big picture. Never forget the boundless space and the fact that everything has always been there and always will be there. Now the title of this talk already shows that getting to know these 7 truths is a matter of doing it yourself. You have to zoom in on the structures in space yourself. The only thing we can do, following in the footsteps of our teachers, is pointing you in the right direction. And we will do that by discussing these jewels of wisdom in this lecture, mainly on outlines. In the course Universal Wisdom, we go much deeper into it. But note, its value and its truth only come to you if you think about it yourself. And when you recognize these truths, these 7 jewels of wisdom, in your own life. If the teachings are truly made of gold, to paraphrase the Buddha, then they pass the most critical examinations. Well, what are these 7 jewels? The first one is Reembodiment or Reincarnation, Karma, cause and effect, the law of hierarchies, self-becoming, progressive evolution, the 2 paths, the 6th one, and the last one, knowing the core. Well, let's look at Reembodiment and Karma first. These 2 universal truths are probably the most well-known also in the Western world, although for many centuries, after the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of Christianity, both ideas were lost. Now you can only lose what you own. And that's why, because also in the Western world, these 2 ideas, these 2 teachings were known. In the early days of Christianity, you find quite easily ample evidence for both of these core beliefs. Reembodiment, of course, has everything to do with cyclicity, the alternation of activity and passivity. In human life it occurs, among other things, sleeping and waking, and in the process of reincarnation. Reincarnation is a special form of re-embodiment. It literally means becoming flesh again. And so it goes for beings who envelop themselves in a body of flesh, humans and animals. But re-embodiment is a universal process. It doesn't only apply to humans and animals, but it applies for all beings. But strictly speaking, you cannot speak of reincarnation in the case of, for instance, plants and minerals, because plants or minerals have no body of flesh. Well, in order to remove the doctrine of reincarnation or re-embodiment from the sphere of belief, you have to research it for yourself. And first then, it is striking that there is actually no process in nature to which there is no underlying cycle. Everything comes and goes and comes back again. Think about that. Moreover, you should ask yourself whether what we call death and life, and by life I mean this active phase, could exist separately. I mean, could death exist if there were no life? And could life exist if there were no death? And just as big and small, or hot and cold, if there were no cold, there was not hot either, yeah? And all other pairs of opposition is the same. And just like all those pairs of opposition, death and life are not absolute concepts. They can only exist in relation to each other. So death and life are related to each other. If there were no death, then there was no life either. And the reverse is also true. And therefore, you can only die because you are alive now, and you can only be born because you are dead. I mean, because you are in the state we, in our human language, call death. As is the case with all pairs of opposition, death and life emerge from each other. You go from life to death, and from death to life. You can only die because you are alive, and you can only being born because you are in that condition which is the opposite of life, death. That's a logical, intellectual underpinning of reincarnation. And of course, there are all kinds of teachings and questions maybe intertwined with reincarnation. But I'm not going to say much about it because the next series of lectures will discuss all aspects of reincarnation. Now, the process of reincarnation, or more generally that of re-embodiment, cannot be understood if you do not include the doctrine of cause and effect. This teaching too is one of the lost chords of Western civilization, although cause and effect is also easily found in Christian teachings, where after all it is abundantly clear that you will reap what you have sown, and you will sow. If you sow wheat, you won't harvest rice. It is as simple as that. Nowadays we know this truth by its Sanskrit name, karma. And the word karma is derived from the Sanskrit verb kri, and that means acting. So karma literally means action. Every action is a cause, leading to a consequence that is strictly consistent with the nature of the act. You see, an extremely logical thought. All of physics, all of science are based on this principle of cause and effect. But this truth is universal. So these truths relate to everything, not just the physical world, but also the psychological, the mental, and the spiritual world. Perhaps speaking of action in this context is somewhat strange, but also an emotion, or a desire, or a thought, even if it is not converted into a physical act, is a cause leading to an effect. So everything you do and think, any activity of consciousness from whoever and whatever it may be, will lead to a consequence corresponding in characteristic. Karma is a neutral law. There is no such thing as good or bad karma. The child who doesn't know the danger of fire and puts his hand in the fire will suffer the same burns as the adult doing so. Now it is true that on the mental plane and underlying every human action is a thought, the motive of an action determines its coloring, and thus also determines the coloring of the cause, which means that the consequences will also have the same correlation. So, when two people perform the same kind of act, but they have very different motives, then the consequences will also be different. Now you will face consequences in this life of causes which cannot be traced back to in this life. Out of ignorance, we then speak of coincidence. But the cause is there. It can be traced back to a past life. And in the same way, there are causes now of which you don't see any consequence in this life. However, they will come, but not always necessarily in this life. You can therefore distinguish three types of karma, as we explain also in the course Universal Wisdom. The first type of karma is karma caused in previous lives and cannot yet manifest itself in the present life. It lies, as it were, in the storehouse of our consciousness, waiting for the right moment for it to manifest. It is like the seed of some flowers, and you sow it, and it takes several years, sometimes many years, many springs, before it germinates. Causes need their typical circumstances in order to produce effects. If you, as a man or a woman, or as a child, or an adult, or as a leader, or subordinate, have created causes, then you need the right situation, the right circumstances to reap the consequences. Sometimes you see that somebody is doing well, wonderful career, happy relationships, sweet and intelligent children, etc. But suddenly something happens, an illness, an accident or whatever, and the whole happy life collapses like a house of cards. The reverse is also true, also happens. Everything goes wrong, you try the right thing, but it doesn't work. And suddenly fate turns, and that is, a certain type of causes is worked out, and circumstances turn for the better. It means that a particular karmic source has dried up, and another set of causes begins to manifest. So, we all have a lot of karmic seed within us, but we don't know what kind of karmic seed is still waiting within us. If you have no insight in your past lives, what most of us don't have, and fortunately so, you don't know what kind of causes you have to sown in your past. And that calls for modesty, to a certain amount of humility, and above all, compassion. Compassion towards those who live in miserable circumstances. The second type of karma is karma that is created in this life, but whose manifestation does not occur until the next or a next life. So these are the actions and thoughts of this life, but the consequences are for the longer term. So we speak about numerous causes, good or bad, that do not have an immediate effect. And if you understand these two types of karma, then you also know that the future is not waiting for us, but that it comes over us from behind. In other words, the future is the result of what we did and what we are doing now. And then the third type of karma is the karma from previous lives, or this present life manifesting in the present life. So that is the karma from now. These are the causes that have reached the stage of consequences. These are the conditions in which we live today. The character that we have now. These are the people we are dealing with now. Again, there is no such thing as good and bad karma. Karma is a neutral force, a universal law, which restores any disturbance of harmony in the cosmos. It's a law of restoring harmony. Your happiness or unhappiness is determined by your own vision on your life. That is how you deal with the circumstances you are in. So you have your happiness or sadness in your own hands. And in fact, we all know this. Two people who are in the same circumstances, or more or less the same circumstances, one is happy and leads a harmonious life, and the other complains constantly, and he is a nuisance to those around him and especially to himself. If you recognize this law of karma and realize the rightness and the justice of it, then you will find a certain peace of mind in every situation, even though you know that the situation is not optimal. And moreover, you have the resources in hand to work on the future. And those resources are yourself. After all, you decide how you think and how you deal with the life you are in. Now we have explained those two laws mainly on the basis of human beings, human consciousness, and in a way that's obvious because for us humans, the human situation is of course the easiest to understand. But these are universal jewels. They apply to everything, minerals, plants, animals, planets, suns, gods, but also for ideas, conceptions, thoughts. We featured in our last issue of Lucifer the Lightbringer a clear example of this. It concerns the democracy of Athens 25 centuries ago. The case was cited in Dutch novelist Leonard Vijver's latest novel, Alcibiades, recounting how Greek democracy was threatened by what we would call nowadays populists. And although, of course, the external conditions are not the same, in Athens, only men of a certain status has the right to vote, there are striking similarities with democracy today. Vijver noted in translating a speech of one of those populists from Athens that he used exactly the same language, the same fallacies as populists do now. Another example, the Roman Empire at the time of the Emperor Hadrian struggled with immigration just as we do in today's Europe. We're talking about asylum seekers, and many perceive that as a huge threat. In Rome of some 20 centuries ago, they spoke of barbarians, and those were not allowed to enter the Roman Empire, just like the asylum seekers now. So Hadrian built a great wall which still stands in England. But what is perhaps more striking is that the Romans tried to make deals with countries that bordered the Roman Empire, exactly as we are trying to do with Tunisia and Turkey nowadays. Is this all doom? Is this fate? No. It's cyclicity and karma. We reap what we sow. And the people who lived then, or a lot of people who lived then and who built a certain civilization, live now. And if they haven't learned anything, the civilization of today will have some of the characteristics of those of the past. But we don't need to repeat what we have done wrong in the past. We can learn. We can learn especially from our mistakes. And we don't have to make mistakes to learn, of course not. But if we have made them, then we can learn from them to do better in the future. Does that process ever end, some wonder? Can you rise above karma? No, you cannot. You are your own karma. Surely you cannot rise above yourself. Look, you can rise. You can if you have developed to the stage in which you have transcended the human realm. Discussing the fifth Jewelsll will tell you more about that. You can transcend human karma, but then you will make karma as a god. And the idea that you can rise above karma sprouts from the thought that karma is something negative. But as stated, that is not true. For karma is a neutral force. Karma neither punishes nor rewards. We do it ourselves. And if you always cooperate with nature, then karma will not have the opportunity to work against you. So, always try to keep that image of the boundless in your mind when you know that you are part of the unity of life and act accordingly. You are cooperating with nature, with the laws of the cosmos, and you don't get a karmic headwind, so to speak. But if you don't, you confront yourself, you face the consequences of your own selfish behavior. But don't see that as a bad thing, because it gives you an opportunity to learn. So karma is always your best friend. It is your best teacher because it allows you to expand your consciousness. Even when life circumstances are not so great. We will later see that these first two jewels beautifully fit into the whole philosophy of life. But there's first a break, a 3-minute break. Ask your questions, use the chat function or email, and we'll try to answer the questions after the break, and then we go on with part 2. So see you in 3 minutes.